Still there. Gonna be, I guess. Subtle problem that we've got, but it's profound. Before I get to all that, this is BTW RLM 350. For anybody that finds this on Pastcast and wants to track down the links I may be using so they can do their own research. And I hope that you do that. Not many do, but those that you do, you probably find fairly well enlightened with what goes on. And the point is, it's not just about that information. It's taking that information and finding out what's really usable, going inside the information, pulling that out, and doing the right and proper actions. Not just getting into the flow of the noise that you hear about everything that's going on. We may touch a little bit about how that works today. I'm going to take on an issue here that I don't normally talk about, but it's becoming now in your face, and it also attaches to this thing that I keep telling you about is working in the world relative to offering people inducements and enticements to alternatives, and people go ahead and readily pick it up and use it as reality when in fact it's not. And then they complain that it's all going to heck in a handbasket. Or you outright go against it, but you don't know that you can't attack it directly. You have to find out the underpinnings to the foundation of it and go for those. And so there's a different way to approach this. Again, I want to thank all the syndicators that are going out there at Sound Minds and UCY TV. I hope, Jules, if you're here and listening, the website's not been loading up. I don't know why that would be, but anyway, I appreciate that you still have us there, I think, and you certainly are posting it at the YouTube. So Sound Minds is over at YouTube, and then you have Normalization of Ignorance will post the post-broadcast, so anybody that wants to post after can pick up the broadcast on numerous sites. You go to reallibertymedia.com or Spreaker, which is where Grandma Mary helps us put that in every time I get to go in. I get to then spread that over to YouTube. So again, it makes it a little bit easier for all this to get the word out. So the production little thing, I've noticed, and I thank you over there at Sound Minds, I have a very short, narrow window of audio control. And I noticed that it was last week it was a little low. My problem is I'm trying to find the high enough value without it actually blowing out the audio as well. And so it's I hope it's a little better today. Anywhere that you hear this, I hope it's always better. I'm really on a minimal system. I've been told I wasn't supposed to be able to broadcast without a mixer. I've never had a mixer. I've worked it out and had people help to work it out as far as offering certain things and trying to mitigate the whole problem of having to have a mixer to do this. So anyway, thank you very much for all that you do and put up with some of that technical stuff. But I'm just adjusting as I can see as I go back. I try to adjust it. It's after the fact, and I apologize until I can. There's no communication sense real time. So we'll do it. I appreciate your patience on this, and I'll just keep trying to adjust it, get it closer to where it's loud enough for everybody, but also not causing distortion as I go out. And the quality's not as good as I'd certainly like it, but there's just some limitations on what I have to offer from a system standpoint. In fact, again, the USB, I've been offered USB microphones and things, and the USB on the system I have is just not cutting it. I just haven't been able to figure out how that works right. It just never works. And so I'm stuck to what I have at this point. That said, I'll move on here to the tabs. Be careful here, folks. I mean, you hear the dates, but you don't realize it's coming on you quick. This is 2020 coming around the corner and right on cue. And this is what caused my attention to let y'all know. If you have 2000 or Windows 7, which is what I have, and that caused another thought here. Windows 7 is losing its maintenance on the software. Not that I have ever been using it for Microsoft, because it seems to be just one failed event after another. I stopped updating. But right on cue, Microsoft comes up with an update patch for a new Windows 0 day under an active attack threat that they want you to get your systems up to date, proving again the Windows product is just a car they're building on the way. And they want to get you into Windows 10, and we know that's a surveillance nightmare. But here it is anyway, just to give you a warning. There's 36 more vulnerabilities in Windows. Windows 7 is going to lose its support in, January 14th or something, if I have that date right. That caused me to remind myself, any of you that have Windows 7, and what happened to my experience and a couple of other people I know, The day that XP lost its support, I lost my system. Surprise. And that's what caused me to go to Linux on one system, but I had Windows 7 on this other system. And so just a word to the wise here, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to solve this. I've got to do a whole lot of file saving just in case so I don't lose the files. And just to let you know, if it takes this system out, I may take a while to get it back up. And so just to let you all know, I don't like this moment, but I don't know what else to do with it. And I kind of have to keep Windows right now relative to the programming, the programs I have, the apps you call them now. And so I guess I'll stop right there. Word to the wise, get your system saved up if you're on Windows 7. There's an update site you can go to. I'm leery to do this at all. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to go through and do this at all, if I do this at all, because I don't like the Windows updates, and I don't like what they do and what their system is, how they get into your system to try and convert you over as well. And like I said, XP was a real eye-opener when they don't want to support something. So coincidental that my XP system at the time failed. And I don't know about you, but I had XP set up really smooth. It was really functional for me. Absolutely. It wasn't as powerful as Windows 7 was in some of its connections to hardware, but boy, I had it really smooth and really fast, so that was a loss. But anyway, words to the wise. January 14th, they're losing the Windows 7 maintenance on their software, and they're going to want you to move on over into their new surveillance tech. Moving into things invisible, how they work this thing through and how we have to put up with it. Wanted to move on to also something that's, again, word to the wise about what's coming down. The technology moves on. You hear it behind the woodshed. You've heard, years I've been talking about how this works. And I've been telling you, I think I'm pretty much ahead of how that works when I tie it together for lots of you. And so here, I've mentioned this before, but now it's on the horizon, actually being promoted here. Invisible ink could reveal whether kids have been vaccinated. Again, this high-tech stuff, this Internet of Things, is all tying into bringing us the data as you need. They want to bring in the vaccinations. They don't want to give you a safe product. They vilify you when you complain about that. I tell you to go to the product data sheet, such that it is the insert, and read it right there for yourself, and then just turn that back out. I've talked about over this. This is not about vaccination. This is about the technology that they're working on to keep track of vaccinations. They call it up front. Keeping track of vaccinations remains a major challenge in the developing world. Even in many developed countries, paperwork gets lost. Parents forget whether their child is up to date. Now a group in Massachusetts Institute of Technology, that's MIT, so some of those of you that don't know that, researchers have developed a novel way to address this problem, embedding the record directly into the skin. And so they actually, in this article, I'll pretty much stop reading here. They, more than just to describe the article, to speed it up here, they are telling you that it's a tattoo. They know that it's a tattoo, and they know that the tattoo is offensive to people. To me, that's an in for you. Number one. Number two is this thing starts the keeping track of the vaccines. They have a special device now that's using microneedles in a framework, a grid system of some sort, and inside there they have the ability to also inject a dye in your skin that lasts about 5 years. And inside that now, they're only talking about information that vaccine. Well, you wonder, okay, they could have the dye that would say you were vaccinated. This becomes more. The story here, when you read farther down, is that it becomes more. How they figured out how to do this was that they insert crystals inside this dye. And that's the crystalline structure is what they reflect light of. Then they tell us that they're going to expand this. It's not just going to be this vaccine. They want to incorporate more biometric data sensors within this dot. They call it a quantum dot. You can't see this thing. So to understand the technology, nanotechnology, it's fascinating and cool, but now it's being used, as you see, to keep track and to do data acquisition. And here's, I think, the line that brings this up. They talked to you about the team ended up using a technology called quantum dots, tiny semiconductor crystals that reflect light, and were originally developed to label cells during research. The dye has been shown to be safe in humans. Now, microdots may not be too bad, but safe in humans has this interesting problem. It goes through the agency process that no one engages, that no one challenges, and so the people that make this stuff do their tests the way they want to get the test to pass, and the agency says it's okay. So all this time behind the woodshed, you've been learning how to fight that, if those of you who are finding this of interest, and you won't. For the most part, I don't see much of anything going on. Those of you that do start it, I don't know, I haven't heard much more on all this subject matter. There's a way to persist, and some of you start, and then I don't hear from you on what's going on, because it looks like the agencies stall you off, and they do that, but there's ways to continue to press. That said, there's also, when you don't get an answer, but look at the news and look at what's going on, you'll notice, as I've heard, the people I've been working with behind the scenes, the subject matter that they've been interested in and telling me that they're submitting notices to have been things that have ultimately altered the end result of what an agency does. And so, I don't know if you keep track of the subtleties here. I've had to over the years. But this technology goes on to explain that they want in the future. They give you all the good reasons why, like for insulin levels and diabetics. But to do that, they need to inject sensors, and that's what the intention here. This is all supported by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And these are the same people that support the end of life, human life on the planet, because it creates carbon dioxide. And we have all the eugenics programs that are wrapped up in it, but they put not just crystals, they're going to inject sensors in this so they can keep track, and it's all radio frequency as well. So here you see, for those of you that are into the mark of the beast kind of information, boy, they just inject this into your skin and at the back of your hand or whatever, in your shoulder, whatever they're going to put it, microdot it, you can't even see it's there, and yet it's going to be the technology that you've heard behind the woodshed is coming to transmit information for this Internet of Things acquisition of the government. And remember, this is all to keep track of your health. And we also have the health care that's notwithstanding that the Obama health care core has been gutted by the Fifth Circuit Court. They are now trying to save it on severability clauses. And so this is going to be a condition where they want that information from you. They want to keep track of what's going on. The technology is coming, and they're now telling us that it's available. They need more data, more stuff. And this is how they do it. So anyway, just keep going here. On the other hand, they have a people that tell you can stand up in different ways relative to vaccines. And again, for me, it's just give us a safe product, and then show us that that technology, your theory of how it works. They won't do that because it's not for that. And then then they make mandatory that you have to get it, that shows how the system is moving against you, and nobody moves against it, except for sometimes you hear it like this. And to me, this is a cool thing, but it's also being involved with trying to address the legislature of a state. It's not final because you stop what somebody inside the so-called representative of the people made a law about. Here, New Jersey Senate calls off vote to eliminate religion as a reason to skip child vaccines as the protesters roar. So the people stood up. The people went to the State House, and the people said no, and whoever put that bill in said we're going to back off. Well, they called off the vote. That was an important clue on the title. I won't go through all this. People stepped up against this, removing an exemption for religion. There's also other exemptions that should be, but they're removing those. Why? Because they want your little ones to be marked. They want you to be marked eventually. And I've told you how to start combating this. If those of you found interest in this would. This is one way, but when they call off a vote, it doesn't mean the problem goes away. In fact, I've shown you over and over that it doesn't. They just wait until the opposition goes away. So you have to work a little bit more than just causing a temporary success, stopping the exemptions. And I still say bring forward this idea that they're not telling you this stuff is safe. And they're working on risk management. In fact, I got into one Twitter response against someone I've been following. I don't know why I'm following her. Yeah, she ends up being a senior scientist with the USDA who talks about we got to stop looking at the hazard and go after the risk. And I sent back and said, but risk management is how they're burning the forests globally. They don't go on the hazard. And she's part of the USDA, which is part of the Forest Service of the United States, for how they're letting it burn. Well, I didn't get a response from her. She's supposed to be the senior scientist now. And they're telling you they're moving to risk management. Risk management doesn't tell you about the hazard. It tells you how they cooked the books. It doesn't tell you how they did it. It tells you that, if you know, they use that to cook the books. And so here's a success. You all got together in New Jersey and you shouted down the vote to take away a religious exemption. I'm telling you that's not going to be enough. As soon as you all go away, they come back. Now, here's the problem. We, as a people, should be free from this sort of having to go down to the state capital, which can be hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And so we have an additional problem. And I found this out before in 2013, what led up to our lawsuit. Because the legislature, in that case, didn't care. They don't care about the law. What they care about is the embarrassment and your massive outpouring, but it's temporary. So I just want to call your attention to this. Very important, very big win because it buys you more time. There's a real problem they know, or otherwise they wouldn't have backed off here, that when you show a presence, you show a valid front, that it has effect. I want you to pay attention to whether or not it's a temporary front or not. And I'm talking not just on vaccines, on everything that we find is coming against us in every way. So here you did something. I want to commend those in New Jersey for stepping up, but the vigilance has to be there, and that having to be vigilant is a problem in my mind. I don't understand why we don't make laws. We found out we can stop. They said it's death and taxes, and Texas gets rid of some of the taxes. That tells you, as I've been telling you, you have the right not just to call down a vote, to stop a vote on something that's supposed to be a representative of your will. No, you have the right to stop all this nonsense if you would just step together and make laws against it. And so much starts to go in my mind. There's so much in the news to talk about, and I see it as a segue against what should be doing. And if I get to it, the sanctuary cities for the gun rights, it pops right in my mind there. But I'm not going to talk about it yet if I get to it. There's certain things that you need to do and certain things that aren't viable and certain things that you're led down a primrose path to. We have to learn to discern how all that works. New Jersey Senate calls off vote as a procedural condition of vigilance that's temporary, and it requires you to continue to watch against this. And again, I've told you that the number of people that would be against the vaccines, whatever their reason, whether it's technically there's not safe, or whether you have a religious, or whether philosophical, whatever you want to call it, that number is less than, typically, if I understand this, less than the 5% the government needs anyway. And so it doesn't need, you can even, and this is how I want you to look at some of this stuff, you can fit your position inside the imposition of the occupier, and you can prevail in there too. That's why I say be fluid in how you address this. We have a serious problem of people gone nuts that claim to be your representative, and I'd like to know where that is, because I've never seen that happen. It's government gone bad. It's not government sitting in a protective position. And I don't know what else to say more than that. Everyone senses it, but no one wants to turn around and work out how that works to go out and stop it. I've had to, so I'm just extending my experience to you all, and you have to just play that as you go. Not everything is the same. So I wanted to touch back on some of these conditions, these stories, this programming that goes on. And go back to last week, I think it was, where I talked about the cave art. I hope some of you went, and this is why I don't talk about a lot of this stuff, but I wonder, I throw stuff out, and today I want to go back to something. Did any of you go read that article? Because there was so much more in there talking about, it falls into this hypocrisy thing. And I'd like to know that people are finding it and know it. That I don't talk to, I purposely didn't talk to, because I wanted to talk about it this week. And in that article that from The Guardian I was reading from, talking to the cave art and the anthropomorphizing of that relative to a caveman's thoughts and reactions, and then attaching it to us this year. And within that being, pulling out the anticipation that they were going to talk about climate change and being able to find it out for you. Inside there was like another joke, another hypocrisy. And I want to point it out because it deals with terms. It deals with how these people communicate, and how they lead your mind, or can lead your mind, and within it, they're telling you something. I want to go back to a couple paragraphs and talk about this. The term I want to focus on right here for now is the term that they use, Magico-Religious. Magico-Religious. Now remember what I talked to you about, what the setup was for last week, because I want to bring that together. That was, to me, it's an internal joke to this whole thing that calls this whole, you can point out immediately what this is about, how it works, and how consistent it is with the very thing that the people in the article deny, or condemn, or acknowledge was condemned. Here's a paragraph goes on from that cave art being found by the boys. The boys discovered Lascaux, it's French, the discoverers of Lascaux took their questions to one of their schoolmasters who roped in Henry Berulle, a priest familiar enough with all things prehistoric to be known as, quote, the Pope of Prehistory. Unsurprisingly, he offered a magico-religious interpretation with the prefix magico serving as a slur to distinguish Paleolithic beliefs, whatever they may have been, from the reigning monotheism of the modern world. More practically, he proposed that the painted animals were meant to magically attract the actual animals that they represented, the better for humans to hunt and eat. And then he goes on to say, unfortunately, for his theories, this turns out to be the animals in the cave walls were not the kind the artists usually dined on. All right, so Magico Religio, he condemns it. We go on to another paragraph a little further down. We are left with the one tenuous clue as to the cave artist's sense of their status in the Paleolithic universe. While archaeologists tended to solemnize prehistoric art as magico-religious or shamanic, today more secular views sometimes detect a vein of sheer silliness. And so remember, this is talking about the cave art, this is talking about going through like a logical relationship between the Paleolithic man and today's modern man. And that first sentence, I don't even know. The cavemen considering their Paleolithic universe position. But he goes on to say that this is a magico-religious that was the archaeologists of current scientists detect a vein of sheer silliness. I want to remind you that climate change is magico-religious. The very author here promoting it and inducing you to think of it in a different way, hiding it inside the text. Climate change as a concept is magico-religious. It's the green religion. It's magic. There's nothing in it. You could look at it the same way. In 10,000 years, if we ever exist that long, they will perceive climate change as magico-religious. Today, it's being promoted as something to be concerned about, that prehistoric man actually considered in this article. Okay, went through a lot there. What I want to point out again is, within these articles is a truth, and you can see right through it if you have the eyes to see. I hope some of you go back to some of these articles, because I tell you there's more in there. This is what I'm talking about. I wanted to touch base on this term. They throw out the term magico-religious when, in fact, that's the promotion within the article. Current day promotion, underneath the auspices of rational discussion, historical representation. And so we get terms are real critical. And they guide our thoughts, and they have a way to constrain us, and they have a way to bind us, if we will be so bound. They also have a way to speak silently and condition our thoughts. And this is a lot to think about at some level, almost too much. You know, you think if we're in that season of goodwill toward men, we would stop doing this to ourselves. That's not the case. In fact, another term I hadn't even really thought about too much, because I would have known the difference until I heard it on Freaker's Ball from Grimner talking about the term Eskimo. I didn't even know there was a big deal about it. But apparently, here we go again, another term. And it's interestingly similar to other words that I'm going to get onto that were in the news this week, term, and then the people asserting some sort of opposition to it, and it's actually either means something particular that's being violated, and utilizing the cover of it to advance a crime, or it's you're identifying ignorant people by it if they don't mean any other thing. And the term Eskimo is very interesting. I would have used the term Eskimo. I would have meant it to be people up in the Arctic Circle of a circumpolar. I mean, it's all around the globe, everything up above in the Arctic, of peoples that live up in that area. I wouldn't have thought a big deal about it. Grimner was talking about two guys lost their jobs, got vilified over the use of that thing. But I just went quickly. I said, well, wow, when did that come up that I can't use the term Eskimo? Well, it ends up being very similar to another term that we're going to get into here. The same error, the same refinement of people who want to be triggered, who actually co-opt the term that is actually not proper, and I just went to the freedictionary.com site to get this note. The term Eskimo has long been criticized as an offensive term. That was a shock to me. I think as much as it was to Grimner when he was reading the article. Since when? I didn't get that memo. Seriously. Anyway, so for the people that live down in the 48, I suppose, or down below out of the Arctic, I guess you don't know these things, but it's offensive, and I don't think so. And here's the reasoning. And many Americans either avoid it or feel uncomfortable using it. I didn't even know that. I've never heard anybody, I didn't know this was a thing. This has to only be a thing since the insane took control. It's because there's a definition here. There's a reason why. It's like really what I said before. There's peoples that live in a certain area of the world up north, and they have been given a name, and we use that as a generic relation to be able to know what we're talking about. I'm going to use it. I just used it. I'm going to use it again. I don't mean it as anything, but now I have to say that I don't mean it as anything, and you'll still take offense? It's an insanity, folks. We can't communicate anymore. In Canada, where Eskimo, as a term, is especially frowned on, and I think this is the general area that Grimner was talking about, two guys lost their jobs over talking about this. The only acceptable term is Inuit. And Americans have generally come to prefer this name too, knowing it to be a term of ethnic pride. Oh, gay pride, ethnic pride. This is the imposition of insanity. So, we're not talking about peoples, we're talking about particular pride. And so we now see the influence that's been gone on. I didn't know this. Most Americans find the word Inuit more acceptable. I thought they were one people that spoke a language. And guess what? Here we come. It's not pride, it has to do with language. But it is not always understood that Inuit cannot substitute for Eskimo in all cases, being restricted to proper usage to the Inuit-speaking peoples of Arctic Canada and parts of Greenland. I want to remind you of this language connection to a word in the news. Another word. Here we go. They're splitting a hair that doesn't need to be split. They confine and control the word, and they find you offensive for using a word that you aren't even speaking. If I was speaking of the Inuit, I would say Inuit. If I was talking about Eskimos and the people above in the Arctic Circle, north, that's what the word I would have always used. Now, not having one thought that I was going to insult anybody. And so we have another point is, as I've said for a long time in my life, it's really all in the receiver. You can transmit stuff, but the violation is built into the receiver. You either tune into that and what you want to make out of it, or you can not tune into it. And now we've made the fact that we have radio waves of, if you will, out in the world, that if I tune into it, it violates me, then I get to say you intended harm to me and take umbrage to it and make you do things. Well, that's just the stakeholder. That's ganging up on people when you get in a group to do that. That's like Genghis Khan, like I've told you, is the system of the imposition that comes when they capture language and they use it against you. And so we go to Inuit. That's fine. It's a language, people. In Southwest Alaska and Arctic Siberia, where Inuit is not spoken, the comparable term is Yupik. Y-U-P-I-K, which has not gained as wide a currency in English as Inuit. While use of these more specific terms is generally preferable when speaking of the appropriate linguistic group, none of them can be used of the Eskimoan peoples as a whole. The only inclusive term remains Eskimo. The claim that the Eskimo is offensive is often supported by citing a popular etymology tracing its origin to Abenaki, an Abenaki word meaning eaters of raw meat. Though modern linguists speculate that the term may actually derive from Montagnier's word referring to the manner of lacing a snowshoe, the matter remains undecided, and meanwhile, many English speakers have learned to perceive Eskimo as a derogatory term invented by outsiders in scornful reference to their neighbors' eating habits. And that's where that ends. So this is a note underneath a definition. This is the world that we live in now. Co-opting what you mean and turning it into a victimization for someone to come back and use it to control you. This is a bit like legalisms as well, although they're not. I don't want to stretch you over there completely. There's reasons why you have definite terms in certain specific jurisdictions. This is the co-option because they impute upon you a harm you intended that doesn't exist. Okay, so this is the dynamic, and this is what became very important this week, why I went back to the Magico-Religious condemnation that modern scientists do, where someone's writing about taking that same Magico-Religious imposition and putting on you in another context, another term that they've invented, co-opted, invented, and turn out to be something that you think is real, and it's a big fraud. That's climate change. This is not about climate change. I'm going to move real quick now. We're not talking about language. We're not talking about climate change in the term. We're talking about linguistics and the co-option of terms and the hiding of crimes underneath that to advance the crimes and gaining influence and favor with that. And imposing upon you a crime and a nefarious intention that does not exist. Let me go to just a quick review of this term called semantic. I'm doing this for a particular reason. I'm moving this along. I'm showing you, hopefully, a technique that you need to start thinking about to utilize when you start facing people who have co-opted a language to use against you. As I told you before, you can't just say you don't belong somewhere. You have to declare where you belong. That you belong somewhere that's distinct and separate and different than what a jurisdiction or supposed authority can put on you. Same thing with this terminology. You can't just say you didn't mean that. You really have to have the thought of what you meant. And then, if you're doing this step a little bit better, you're actually imposing upon the condition and anticipation, which shows that they can't even move it across, and that the attempt to do so was a violation to you, and you gain that burden, you flip that burden back. Again, as I talk to you all the time, there's a whole lot more behind what I tell you every week. I can't even get into it. This may, I hope, and this is a very difficult thing to go through because of all the places and the conceptings that have to go on here. But I'm going to try and do this one issue relative to what we call semantic. Relative to, in my interpretation, the utilizing of terminology, necessarily the abuse of it, to gain an advantage and to impute to the world an action that's not really going on. I feel the abuse of the Inuit discussion in Eskimo, where it can be shown to extend to all peoples in the Northern Hemisphere, is one of those semantic abuses. And so semantics is the linguistic, and I want to focus on this linguistic thing. It's about language here, and all these discussions are about language, and they're being adulterated and co-opted or ignored also to advance certain things, to run cover for other nefarious ideas. And so I get to the point of here, I'm finding myself more and more against that abuse. So semantics is the linguistic and philosophical study of meaning in language, programming languages, formal logics, and semiotics. It is concerned with the relationship between signifiers like words, phrases, signs, and symbols, and what they stand for in reality, their denotation. So this is language, and it's looking at its uses. Now, I would add, they say phrases, they say words. I say terms, because terms show me in the legal, that's what terms are. They're a word of definition that is a term. It's not the word that you necessarily read. It's a definition. And that also extended for those of you listening how to do this, where I told you when we put in our lawsuit, I didn't talk to treason, because for most people they don't understand that, but I just used a long-form definition. I said, you made wars on the laws of the United States. When I go back to decipher that, if we were to have to answer to it, that would be a one-word term called treason. Now, you just don't say that. We had proof of that, so that's the facts that you present, that you can produce it at the trial in a complaint. Okay, so We're talking linguistics, we're talking words. I'm pointing out that people use these words against you, and you can see the ones that use the words are actually doing the thing, like the Magico-Religious and promoting climate change. It's fraud under so-called best sciences, which is all risk management, which is not hazards and facts. It's statistics. It's bean counters making up what they need. And you're going to pay for that, like let it burn policy. Because you do risk management, you don't come to the conclusion and somehow everybody loses their mind and can't figure out. You don't have prescription fires just because risk management says it's okay during fire season. And off a point there, semantic. Semantics is a linguistic and philosophical study. All right? And so that's a semantic. You talk about semantics normally, we talk about that in, you're just being evasive. Well, I want to talk about it more. We talked about the denotation of terms and what they mean so we can make sense of our communications. And I'm saying that gets co-opted, those get co-opted in order to harm us. And if we're not checking that, and we don't have an anticipation, an anticipatory action for it, we're going to be behind the moment that someone takes advantage of us. And this brought me up to this another thing here. It started out with an article 2 days before I got a tweet from Grimner's Barman account relative to say, here comes a thing. And it says, here's the article first that came up 2 days before, anticipating a problem. Well, for those of us that want to hold against the abuse of language, because it starts to make all language useless, and therefore anybody who uses it as a club against you. You have to start paying attention to how this, and start getting in your mind how you're going to be placed in a disadvantage by the utility of it all. No, really, you must love Israel. Now, right there, I have told you before that I have a problem with using the word Israel. Why? Because I'm already anticipating a problem. It's an abuse that's coming. And they're using that term, that word, or that name in this case because of not my authority that I claim, because the authority claimed by those that will be using the abuse. They use the word, the term, or the name Israel, and that's a fraud. And so I have to always say, this is not about Israel. This is about Israelis, or those attempting to create a state. And this becomes very important because this is going against, for those of you that, this is about Israel. No, this is about affronts to your free speech, and affronts to your equal protection, and affronts to what the government's going to prefer against those of you that would also be in the same class. And so this is not, when I talk, I'm not talking about the news. I'm not talking about anything particular. I'm talking about subject matter areas of failure for us because we're not ahead of the game and anticipating there's an insane world coming on to make its way, and their plan will win, and you have to be standing up against it, or you will be subsumed, at least, if nothing more. Just subsumed by that whole thing. It's an insanity, and you'll complain it's an insanity, but you won't really want to respond. You probably don't even really know how. I mean, how many discussions do I have with people to start a process? I tell you, I can give you the path. That's the point. No, most people don't even know there's a path there, let alone an action to go down, enough to follow. And so, no, really, you must love Israel was the heads up something was coming with the tweets also that Trump says claiming we have to get people of this country, to love Israel more. I have to tell you that. We have to do it. We have to get them to love Israel more, because you have people that are Jewish people that are great people. They don't love Israel enough. That's interesting about that because of something he says later, which is really derogatory if you want to class people as Jewish. And I'll come right up in front and say, I don't know what Jewish really is. Because of the abuse, the semantical abuse of these words and terms, Jewish has really lost its meaning. In fact, I found an article, someone wrote something on this, pretty authoritative. And he goes through the logic. What was his name? John Gard? I think he goes through an analysis and shows that the word Jewish doesn't mean anything like what we've been told. Anyway, we're going to hear the heads up coming that there's something going on. President Trump will sign an executive order defining Judaism as a nationality. not just a religion, thus bolstering the Education Department's efforts to stamp out boycott Israel movements on college campuses. Now, when you go to the actual text, they're not talking that way, but they do talk about the Education Department and the funding. So that's the only power that the executive has is over the extension of the purse that Congress has extended in this check and balance. People see it as a boycott Israel attack. But it's not even just that, or even that at some level. So that was the heads up. Then I get the Twitter barman automated story. Trump targets anti-Semitism and Israeli boycotts on college campuses. I thought that was better. Israeli, not Israel. Remember, we got a historic relation to a name that can't be claimed if you want to go down that path, and you have to, because the people that are doing this abuse are taking that authority. But they don't even take that authority. They're taking authority they actually can't prior in time to the man Israel and the sons and grandsons that are his progenitors that do take over the land in Palestine. And so, again, I've told you how to do this in land law, how it cleans everything up really, really fast. And you find out who's rightfully there, you find out who's not rightfully there, and you find out also the process that they ought to have been doing all this time if they intended to make it work and be peaceful on Earth. And so this anti-Semitism calls us to the term. And Israeli boycotts. Better, this is not a boycott on Israel, because it couldn't be, given that we're speaking in the authority that's promoted by Israelis to make a state. And it's really, this other term called Zionism. It's a political front abusing all of this. And this abuse, it really makes these words useless to use. And that caused me to remind myself when I saw this attack, not on you necessarily, unless you're connected to the university system, which you also know we sued indirectly in the equity action, because the university system promotes what? The alternative agenda against you through alternative dispute resolution and consensus. So all this ends up focusing eventually back into the same thing I've been telling you, this taffy that's been made, making anything just jackjaw, until you settle down and you start to define yourself, and you start taking the responsibility to really understand what's going on. Stop talking about being critically minded, but have one and be able to articulate that. And again, you're going to have limitations. We all will. But to bicker over also what's a critical mind, and to be woke or not woke, and I see that woke is now handed over to a liberal by the side of the people who thought they were working the red pill, handed it off to the liberals who tried to claim it, and nobody's woke. Everything's a bunch of this nonsense. So then we get the news. Trump does target anti-Semitism and Israeli boycotts on college campuses. He does sign that order. So this is coming down on this one. So now I'm focused on what the problem is here. What are they going to affect our free speech about? What are they going to affect our any decision that we would have that was counter to the government? Because now it's become a presidential order. Remember, it's a presidential order. It's not. It acts within the executive as a law or as a rule, but it's not law, and it can be changed as another executive. Right, so you have an affront up front, but what was really the affront was an interesting thing, and we'll get that in a second. What's this anti-Semitism? And so the government, so now because we went to the executive, we don't have to look at what the government's saying. Remember, I said jump into the jurisdiction, see what they say. You're not going to change that jurisdiction, but you have to understand what they're coming with. And what you see is the State Department, it has a definition for anti-Semitism, because this order has this term in it. It also has the term Jew, which I've said I've understood what the meaning of the word Jew is, and I see an authority, somebody who's done an academic study that he's looked at it, and he thinks he knows what it is. It's certainly not what we ever thought. But Department of State has a working definition, not law, not reason, anything, just a working definition. And this shows you this administrative imposition. And I looked at that, so if it's working, that means a lot of you who have a voice, who want to stop calling people names and stop characterizing their physical nature and look directly at the fact of the reality of things, you could take all that that energy you have, all that pent-up energy that you want to start typing in the chat rooms, you organize your thoughts better, and you speak better to it, and you could be part of that working definition that works it out. I mean, works it right out of the vocabulary. Because of all the things that you smart people that understand the problems, but you resort to name-calling or character feature characters that or like what Trump does in one of these statements before he signs this, before the group, the so-called Jewish group, he causes what you might say is being racist comments against the very people he's writing the law to support. And you start seeing this incongruities, you start to realize we really are in an insane time, and if you don't have it locked down, any side's going to win against you. You have no position to make. And they will force you in the future to do something. Like they're going to force your little ones to get those vaccines through that new cartridge, and they're going to be tattooed, and you won't have a say because you couldn't stop it because you didn't listen behind the woodshed on how you would anticipate that before, more than going to get your state house to not vote right now. Defining anti-Semitism, the Department of State is use a working definition. Not a definition now, folks. I mean, working definition is not a definition, folks. On May 26, 2016, 31 member states of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, boy, isn't that consistent. Wow. Anyway, of which the United States is a member. Why are they a member? This is you understand the national sovereignty thing going on here. You really have to pull this together on how ingrained this whole thing has been right underneath our noses. And adopted a non-legally binding working definition of anti-Semitism at its plenary in Bucharest. This definition is consistent with and builds upon the information contained in the 2010 State Department definition. As a member of IHRA, the United States now uses this working definition and has encouraged other governments and international organizations to use it as well. Has anybody challenged whether or not that membership was valid? Anybody? Making preference for a view because of some, promotion? All y'all that have a complaint about the Holocaust, and I don't mean that it didn't exist, I mean saying it didn't. There's some people that died. But I'd like to know the Holocaust that was the whole thing called World War II as well. But we're talking about people that are going to make a claim underneath this thing called Semitism. That's what this ends up coming down to. Because the United States government is focused on it, and these people in the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance it's important enough that they make a working definition themselves. It's not a definition, it's working. So it's an influential term, not a real definition. So what is the whole point about this? Why is this even coming down? Trump appeases Israel lobby with executive order. Are his executive orders supposed to be politically influenced that way? Well, apparently it is, and we let it. Whether or not we have an actual angle on any of that, when you start realizing, like I do, that Lincoln was a lawyer, and he did something in the country, and you hear the government courts tell the Supreme Court say that this place changed, and then you start to wonder maybe any of this stuff is valid at the point of what I've been saying, and we have to address this a different way as well. But he appeases an Israel lobby with the executive order. Isn't that discrimination? He comes underneath the discrimination authority. Isn't this discrimination? Just days after U.S. President Trump spewed vicious anti-Semitic rhetoric, which was an interesting incongruity, he does, Israel lobby groups are celebrating his executive order taking aim at supporters of Palestinian rights. Well, now that's interesting. As we look at the term Semite, why would that even be a condition? Unless this is not about Semites. And this is where you start to pick this thing apart, and you start realizing that right in the first couple paragraphs, the abuse and semantic use of these terms is making language useless. And at some point you're going to have to settle down and make it useful for you and redefine your life by it, and certainly without change. Israel, which is not true here, is the most extreme defenders, are not bothered by the president's anti-Jewish rhetoric as long as it comes wrapped in the unquestioning support for Israel. It's not in support of Israel. If I understand correctly, President Trump is a Presbyterian, which is essentially a Catholic, which they claim is Christian, but it's not. Catholic is not Christian, for all y'all will be shocked when I say that. It actually worships Mary, gives lip service to Christ, and so you really have to start paying attention to all this stuff, what's going on. And I talked about this before. Why did the Catholic Church work with the so-called Jews? And Jews has no meaning here, but we'll just use because most people understand, they think they know what this means, and attaches to some people. Why did they work with the Jews? In order to put a tax on, or interest on their own parishioners, if you will. There's a hand-in-glove working going on that's not Christian, okay? So let's move back. Trump appeases a lobby. And so the statements that he makes, essentially, I paraphrase, was that you're all here, you lobby, this lobby, we're in a big meeting here, you all are going to vote for me, you all are real estate moguls that they're wealthy and rich because of it, you're going to, that's who you are, and you're going to vote for me because you can't go, you couldn't very well support Pocahontas and her wealth tax. You don't want to have your wealth attached by that tax. So if you look at this from a so-called racist, I have a trouble with that word too. Remember, in the Doubleday Dictionary in 1974, if you ever get a copy, go look at the word race. It examples lawyers. The race of lawyers. And isn't that pivotal to your violation in life today? Well, anyway, that's a race. All right, so race is something other than any identifiable things. That's why I told you, if you eat chicken, you're probably racist. You'll eat chicken until it's all dead. That means you hate the race of chickens. We want to, again, anthropomorphize all this stuff. It's just a definition. It can be any group of people, any identifiable group of things, and not people, but anything. It all depends. That grouping is arbitrary as well. But everyone's referring to this Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. They come under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 relative to the governmental department's enforcement of Title VII. But what Trump says to the lobby is that you people are real estate moguls, money-grubbing people, but you're going to vote for me anyway. And, oh, by the way, I'm going to do this thing so that you're not attacked, at least by speech, on campus. And we're going to put in positions on the administrators of the campus to heighten the question and interrogation of any speech that would happen, so that we will eliminate anything that's anti-BDS, in other words, favors Palestinian equality if we go there, or anti-state of Israel. It's not Israel, folks. That's a man. That's a man that gave us, that was rewarded with to his sons and to grandsons land, which comprises peoples like the Eskimos that live above the North Polar Circle, not the Inuit, particularly the linguistic separation. So we have another guy that comes up as Adelson, who bankrolled, he's a casino billionaire, he bankrolls Trump. This is like a present to the guy from Trump. And yet he goes into this meeting and he vilifies what their condition is in the same stereotypical sense that some of you I see in the chats would talk about these same people. We call them, there's a name Jews you attach to it. But really, I don't even know what that means anymore. And I don't think that, I think the authority from the people that are considered, at least to the point until you challenge the word, they don't even know about that. There's so many changes because why? Underneath all that, you have someone abusing the language in order to come under the color of legitimacy, to make themselves legitimate. And these actions by Trump today, notwithstanding his Presbyterian backing, prove that he is moving forward on an agenda to move another political agenda forward and support it. And you must love Israel. Otherwise, you're going to get vilified. And what this does is this bill that came up, this executive order, it starts to set the foundation and privilege of 1.5% of the population against everybody else. On top of this. And there's no distinction, at least by the promotion, of a political reason why you would be against it. However, if you go look at the order, it doesn't specifically, it actually has savings, I'll say, the savings clauses. And you look for the words, the question, the mays and the shoulds and all this other stuff. It's in that bill. So my view is he was speaking derogatorily in the lobbying, to the lobbying group, saying, you're going to vote for me anyway. But I'm going to give you this. But when you read the text, it's really conditioned on a lot of, it's a conditional grant. But it will work against people who now have to be checked and are not presumed innocent. So that's another attack that this thing gives us. You may think it's about Israel. You may not want to hear it about anti-Semitism. It's not. It's about people incrementally attacking essentially your innocence and your right to speak in different ways. And what have you been told? What, you know who your master is by what you can't speak against? Well, you can live that way, or else you can be your own master, if you will, and not have any that way. At least not another man with an opinion. Not who confesses that he comes out and says, you guys are going to vote for me anyway, you money-grubbing real estate moguls. I mean, okay, so you can read all this. I'm paraphrasing a lot of these things. You can read, you really should read about this you got to get the foundation on what different perspectives are, and then go back to what's actually going on, the black and white that's going to be ruling, because this is going to come out with a vengeance. If the word Eskimo has become vilified to the point that people lose their job for using it, when in fact it's valid to use, how much more abused is the term Semite and then the term anti-Semite? And I've talked about that, and we're going to get to a little bit about that. And what you have to have is now a new position. Why? Because you have to be able to articulate how you're not vilifying people for race. You understand what they did here? They took a religion and made it a nationality. Now, I want you to apply that. Why is everybody else not becoming a national? What about the Scientologists? What about the Seventh-day Adventists? What about the Christians? What about the Catholics? What about any of all the people that have a different religious belief or philosophical belief? Why aren't they nations? Shows you the abuse and the extension of what's really going on here. That 1.4 or 5% of the population is getting preferential treatment under discrimination law, no less, to take a word that's never been erased, applicable to the Civil Rights Act, and now is a privilege they get to use, those that can identify as such, on a term that doesn't exist. You make up what a Jew is, and it changes. It depends on what the argument on the other side is. Why? Because you're dealing with someone who's trying to give you the impression that there's an objective authority. And that's why I say when you find someone who's trying to make an imposition on you, you're going to have to find your own objective authority. Israel and Trump's executive orders killing free speech is another, again, a continuing thing. I think this is almost a problem. Be careful on buying into it. It's just a killer for free speech. There's so much more going on underneath this. This is running cover for all the things I've been talking to you so far about. It's a semantic abuse. And so you're going to have this position that you make. Well, Trump says this at the lobbying meeting that he had. A lot of you are in real estate business, and that you're brutal killers, not nice people at all, but you have to vote for me. You have no choice. You're not going to vote for Pocahontas. I can tell you that. You're not going to vote for the wealth tax. He's telling it to the people he's just writing a special executive order for that directs the education department and the university system behind it relative to funding restrictions if they don't protect this group of people. He just vilified. He just stereotyped. Has got to throw out the door of reason on any of this. And you really, again, I just can't tell you, this term abuse, and the in-your-face violations you can't just rail against. You have to step back and place yourself in a better foundation to watch the abuse. The criminal will do what they will. The abuser will do what they will. You don't have to engage the argument. Like I tell you, don't make this stuff an argument. Create a foundation you come from and stick, and make sure that's a foundation, not what you think it is, like the opinion. And you come up with a rationale behind it so that you can't be thrown anything you do. And I'm talking some of you guys, some of you folks, guys and gals, may go to speak at universities. I don't know. The rest of us won't care. But this is an attack in that area because that license, that dirty snowball, starts to pick up momentum. It comes outside of that realm, like the university system does to control the rest of your life, whether you know that or not. I talk about that all the time. So one of the aspects is killing free speech. This is doing a whole lot more than that. This is also, well, in one of my opinion is if you find the dispossession, murder, torture, and slow-motion ethnic cleansing of Palestine disgusting and criminal, you're an anti-Semite. If you organize like-minded folks and urge others to boycott Israeli products, you may end up in prison. It's okay to criticize official enemies, Iran, Syria, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, Russia, China, your imaginary crimes such as chemical weapons attacks in Syria and Russia's meddling in the elections rigged and prearranged by the hidden elite, but you are flirting with serious danger when you talk the truth about Israel. Enough there. Opinion, reflection, facts you can check. I want to get to the point of how this word is killing us, I want to come up and show you some other way that I try to deal with it myself, although there's more behind all this. It just is a reflection of how to start to deal with all this nonsense, this insanity that is the abuse of terms. Yep, the Executive Order of Combating Anti-Semitism is printed on at the White House website. You can get it. You can see that they use the word anti-Semitic, anti-Semite, anti-Semitism. They use the term Jew. They don't define the term Jew. They just say discrimination against Jews with a capital J. That's undefined. The anti-Semitism is defined by a Holocaust group I have to wonder why do they have the preferential definition? First of all. Secondly, it is a working definition. This whole law is non-binding as well on anything. And that those things I want you to read here, and for every other place you find, not just in anti-Semitism, but any other place, you show where you can find where they step short of making it mandatory. They offer you that hole, that savings clause to assert. It's what I've been talking to you to look for forever on how to respond to this insanity we're up against. And the failure to respond to that insanity, if you've done nothing, is a consent to it. Second, if you get caught by it and you don't respond properly with the foundation I'm asking you to start thinking to develop for yourself, you will be caught to be now intending to cause the harm they claim you would, and you will now pay the price. And I don't know what more to say. This is the dynamic that I've been talking about coming on. It's coming in your face. I keep looking at this. I want to read some of it, but why should I? You need to read the words yourself. And okay, one word pops out. It shall be the policy of the executive branch. Policy and execution. It's not law. It's non-binding, but it's to enforce Title 6 against prohibited forms of discrimination rooted in anti-Semitism as vigorously as against all forms of discrimination prohibited by Title 6. Well, it doesn't say you can take a religion and make it a race. That's a fiction. The other thing is that they can't stop your political discourse. And so this is this whole order, even though I believe it's an ineffectual, I don't even know what to call it. It's just this thing that, exactly what it said before, it appeases a lobby. Is that the proper action of a president of the United States or any president of a country, to appease a lobby? Well, maybe look at that, because he is, isn't he? And it means something. And it means something in a very vile way, in a way. It's all about the ends justify the means for this guy as well. In the meantime, there's no enforceability, but that will be imposed upon you. is the lesson you need to learn that they've done in other places of your life. I guess this is the thing here. So we have this vocabulary that's used. It's defined but working, so that's not a definition. It's used without definition, so that's wide open. And so you're going to have to go get, in any subject matter, get the relevant information that you need. And in this case, I'd read a while back a document, and I don't think I've read the whole thing, but I read enough to call my mind to it. Got a link for you. It's on the internet. It has to do with what this whole thing on the Semitic, the use of Semitism to advance another agenda is. And it's written, called Jewish Eugenics, written by John Glad. And I found some very interesting things. Something I didn't know Eskimo was a frowned or a bad word, right? And it's not. But you can get into a position where people will take umbrage to it and make it an issue. All of a sudden now you got someone who's triggered, and they don't understand they're mentally unstable. You don't understand that that's how you have to deal with mentally unstable people, that they're mentally unstable. We try to coddle them in a bad way. We give them the air to continue their psychosis. And that has to be, we got to figure out ways to stop it. And then we have the empathy required to do that as well. I guess we could go violent, but I truly hope that we don't go there. But in this document, about page 36 was an interesting position, because this brings up the problem of how using someone's definition when the root term may be meaningless, and there's proof for that. And the root term we're talking about is Semite. And I'm talking about the semantic abuse. And this brings up my focus of what I want to show you today. Like I've told you before, I put in land law. If you want to talk, if you only have real property and you don't assert the free simple that you have, the government will accept that you have taxable, controllable land, not something that's free from that. And so you have to have understanding of where the foundation of where you really are, not accept what is mischaracterized upon you. And so we have starting out with, in this page 36, a reassessment of vocabulary. I found this very fascinating. Now, when I use a word, Humpty Dumpty said, in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be the master. That's all. Now, what have I been telling you behind the woodshed about making sure you have a foundation to control the language, the linguistics, the language of what you use? And now this article goes on to expose something here that when I read this, and this is, I guess, what kind of rests in me to then challenge all these terminologies that are used as official foundation for support that allows Trump to even use the words that are really not there. And there's a lot of intelligent people that look at that don't like what they're seeing, but they'd rather resort to name calling instead of these facts and assert these things in proper form. Not amongst yourself, bickering, trying to make yourself sound better than more better before your own peers than going after the real problem. John Glad goes on to write this: absurd terminology is a reliable barometer of muddled and emotional thinking, and any serious reexamination of Jewish eugenics requires a reconstitution of vocabulary. The word anti-Semite, for example, still hangs as an anachronistic coinage of the late 19th century racial taxonomy, referring not only to Jews, but also Akkadians, Canaanites, Phoenicians, and Arabs. Semites were supposedly the offspring of Shem, one of Noah's 3 sons. Historical maps printed in the turn of the century, 19th century and 20th centuries, show the southern shores of the Mediterranean are settled by Semites, while areas of the North Mediterranean are indicated as inherited by Aryans. The mythology is no longer taken seriously, although in all fairness, it must be conceded that the Semitic languages are recognized as a distinct linguistic family. Now, let's just stop where you can read. There's lots of pages in this article. I'm not going to be able to hit it all. Given that we see academia, if nothing else, he doesn't cite the proof for this, but given that we now see there's an insight of an academic dismissal of the utility, the ability to use the word Semite, that it's been used, and it doesn't exist in actual fact. It's anachronistic language. It's supposedly referring to a biblical thing, which apparently this author will denounce, but he concedes something very critical and important. He concedes the Semitic languages are recognized. They're not a question. And so right here was really, in a way, this unawareness that I hadn't had before a while back. Again, the word has been used and it doesn't actually have a real meaning. That if you take out the fact, if you put in the word that Semite means nothing, you have anti-nothing if you're anti-Semite. Then this term being used as a bludgeon to beat everybody is a non-starting term that's used, abused, as a semantic against what you're doing and what your opinions might be and whatever. And in this case, if it has no meaning, that there's really no status that you'd have that couldn't be imputed to you about your intent. And if this is the secretness about this going on, that how they beat you down, which I think is part of it, that's what you're not understanding. I've been telling you behind the woodshed, what you have to look through. It's how they take words like best science and turn it into this fraud that you rely on. So there's a view, and I'm going to take either side here. The concession he makes is critical. It directly ties to the Inuits triggering over the word Eskimo. It's an abuse of a semantic at some level. And there's a position I think we can take. Given that there's a proof that can be made that the Semite means nothing actually, then the term anti-Semite means nothing. And it's used as a club to bludgeon people. It's a fraud. It's a deception. And it's employed by people that we know are meant to deceive us. In a condition of deception. And the word is improper to use at all. At all. Let me move to the concession. The one of linguistics. The distinct linguistic families. Like we heard the word Eskimo. Of the group of Eskimo peoples, we have the Inuit-speaking peoples, or we have the Uric-speaking peoples. What if I put Hebrew? What if I put Phoenician? What if I put whatever, numbers of Semitic languages in there? Given there's a concession to the linguistic name, then we incorporate the total class of people. Not just the Inuit, but the total class of all peoples that live in that area. And therefore, when you look at Trump's order that way, which has actual foundation, notwithstanding a potential question on whether Semite means anything, you see that you cannot pose it against the Palestinians, which is apparently the focus, which it doesn't say in the order, which is the focus. It's an incongruent order. Because the Semite word, the anti-Semitism, the Semitism is conceded to be a linguistic class. Just as I said behind the woodshed before. And so on its face, this executive order really is vulnerable. But why? So what's the point here? It was done for political purposes. The President of the United States conceded to a political reality. And he's not above taking advantage, even if it means that people are going to be harmed. Or people are going to take advantage to try and harm others that aren't as aware as those of you listening behind the woodshed. And so let me look at this. What have I been talking about? This working definition and how all this seems to work. And I've talked about this before. I think I found Zionism is anti-Semitism. If we want to give the linguistics about this, I'm going to jump right into that. It's about the same time I talked about the BTWRLM 334. Not this broadcast, the one before, where I talk about the military drills in North Carolina, and that brings up the Virginia thing and the sanctuary cities. No, I already talked about that there. I bring up Zionism is anti-Semitism. I'm on record of this. I'm condemned by it, folks. But I don't do this just because I have an opinion that's vilifying. I want to point out certain things that are provable. And so you have an anticipation of the future on how to look at how all this stuff is working out and make those parts relevant. It's all important. This one's all important because it's the method and the lesson on how we as a people are being led by the nose and to the water and then drowned because we don't realize we're not supposed to have that ring in our nose in the first place. But John Glad makes some very important statements in his document. And there's more and more and more. In fact, he does the proof and shows, well, what is a Jew? He actually goes through and shows by history. This is all a bunch of, I'll just use the word Jewish people speaking. This is the proof of the people that he's talking about. And this whole thing ends up being one of genetics, not at all what we've been hearing, which is pretty fascinating. He goes through and says that Jews equals Judaism is matrilineal descent. Jews equals Judaism and matrilineal descent together. And they keep changing. Jews equals Judaism. But he goes through and shows it's not Judaism. He goes through that the people that are speaking about it say it's something else. And so what do we go through? It's an interesting proof that they go through citations to start to read to find out a more informed and factual basis to present the problem of the misuse of these terms to advance crime, essentially, when you get down to abuse of people. Well, it's crime. It's just crime. It shows that Jews means non-Jews. And guess what? When you go to the executive order, it actually states that it pertains to Jews and non-Jews. Now, how can it not pertain to the Palestinians then? Unless this Jews and non-Jews is this problem that the Jews are not a race and the modern Jews are not ancient Jews, which we've talked about, they're Judean. And that ultimately you ask, what is a Jew? Like I've said before, I've lost how you can identify what a real Jew is. I mean, I don't even know if images anymore mean nothing to me. There's a proof in this document. You really need to see it. What he comes up with ultimately is the Jews equal to members of a cultural and breeding alliance. That's certainly different than what I ever thought. Now, he has the proof. Don't take it from me. Go read it. Go run his proof down. I'm mentioning to you, there's a way to look at a lot of this. It depends on how much information you have. We're using a working definition for anti-Semitism that I have told you could not exist properly, and it could not be properly applied the way it's been applied against everybody in the world. And please I'm this far in, don't think I'm going against anyone. What have I told you about the Palestine? You have a hereditament there. Go prove it. Stop making war on everybody. Go find your brothers there from wherever you are right now in the world. Go there and take your claim by the way you can prove the land. Not by this fraud. Not by the thing that it comes out and we see war crimes coming out of it. But getting back to the point, the working definition. The fact that I'm on record of saying Zionism is anti-Semitism. Why? Not because of the Semite is not provable now, it's not seriously believed to exist, but because it's conceded to be a linguistic class. And this order shows that Jews or non-Jews can participate in this order, yet we see everyone saying it's against Palestine. The linguistic class, the Palestinians, are one of the language groups in this. You can't be anti-Semitic and talk against and without being against Palestine themselves. And we have Zionism here is the political movement. It's the one coming under color to confuse the language. And when I read this document that looks pretty authoritative, I went through a few things. They look like the people exist. It looks like what they said on the basic research just to see if it was okay. They themselves don't believe any of the stuff that we're being told. They don't believe what President Trump just signed into being. And yet they concede a linguistic connection. We have a big problem, Houston, and everywhere else. We're working with a working definition that's not a definition. We're working with words that have they're fluid in their meaning, which means they're meaningless. I wish they were solid, because then we could get off the quicksand, couldn't we? And then I say, okay, let's make more solid a foundation. Let's not live on sand. Let's not build our house on sand, folks. Let's get back to a foundation. We have to do that ourselves. And we have to have that as the basis for why we oppose the semantic misuse and abuse. And so this term came to my mind. Maybe you can, it's a working definition, folks, as I keep on going through this. I'm so sick and tired of all this noise and nonsense and insanity, as many of you all are. I'm not the only one. But we have to come to terms, and we have to wheel ourselves into action to start to begin where we can to stop it. But I came up with a term, what I think it is I am, because in the executive order it says that they have to interpret your political intention or your intention, and it has to be something that you intend to be anti-race, to be racist in your position. And I said, that's the point. You hand over now to someone else the ability to look at me and not presume me to be innocent, and they go by the definition that I was never a part of, and they defame me. How am I supposed to defend myself? Well, the way you start to do that is you start to have your own language yourself. I came up with this, just working this through. It's nothing. If you don't accept it, it's nothing. If you want to accept it, to consider it, it might be something. It may not be applicable. It might be. It's a lot of a mumbo-jumbo. Why? Because we're dealing with a bunch of nonsensical terms anymore. Climate change is not the changing climate. It's a weapon. It was made by Magico-Religious personalities. And so is Anti-Semitism. And I've proven to you now at least one thread of proof, someone asserts that is proven by the way they do it, and the one I've already told you long ago. And then I've shown you the actual, how you work that through to stop the violence and stop the nonsense. And to show you they don't do that, they mean something else. And there's others that they're not wanting to address, that they'll call that when you call that out will make you a criminal as well, is the real serious problem, why you have to have a better foundation. I came up with this. We're talking about the word semantic. It occurred to me it's the abuse of the language, the disregard of the linguistic classes that is part of the problem, and the study of that would give me this ability to say, no, in this regard, here's a working definition I think I'm starting to work with. I'm really not anti-Semitic at all here. I'm just tired of the abuse and the semantic abuse. And so I'm anti-Semitism. I believe in anti-Semitism, not anti-Semitics. It's the working definition here is anti-Semitism is opposing the abuse of such terms as anti-Semites, such as done by nefarious political groups as Zionistas, those of whom which are rendered such terms as Jew meaningless or harming legitimate interest or at the expense of others innocent, as these sorts of war criminals deceptively transition from religion to nationalism in acquiring the color of legitimacy, or, quote, to intimate or coerce a civilian population, close quote, committing terrorism, foreign or domestic, and defining the seriousness of such special interest semantic conflation. There's kind of a lot of words in your mouth there as I'm working that through, don't you think? I'm not anti-Semite. I'm just fed up and sick and fed up of the abuse, the semantic abuse. I'm an anti-Semitite, I'm an anti-Semonite, an anti-Semonite, not an anti-Semite. And I think if you listen to what I've been saying, you'll start to believe that in yourself, and you'll be able to put this together, and you'll be able to put yourself in a foundation of, I have no hatred whatsoever. I have a respect for myself to not be bullied and not be duped, and to not be forced into complying with something that's really a crime against people, mankind. Where did I get that term, that quote that I read? Gee, I told you long term for treason was the making war in the United States. Where did I said, quote, to intimidate and coerce a civilian population? I said committing terrorism. You think I just pulled that out of my notebook? No, I went to the internet. It's right there at 18 U.S.C. 2331, and it's an interesting definition there, international terrorism. And I find this fascinating that they would agree to embrace this as the United States government. But then you see the truth, that the United States government embraces terrorism because it's a terrorist. The term international terrorism means activities that, A, involve violent acts or acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state, or that would be criminal violation if committed within the jurisdiction of the United States or any state. And B, appear to intend to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. Where I got the quote. International terrorism or domestic terrorism. And it's the acts done that would be a violation if committed within the jurisdiction of the United States has to apply to those Zionists that are attempting to kill the Semites. That includes themselves if they considered themselves Hebrewic language speaking. If you want to get into the nonsense about this. And so the words are here for objective basis to rebuff, at least object strenuously, if not completely, against the misuse, the abuse of Semitics in our language, and the creation of a lack of meaning within it in which they take advantage. I've told you to find the language in the black and white as your basis because that's the one that can't be changed by the people who want to harm you. It's written before you got there. It's not made up by you. I hope this is just an outward way to show you. I just took the definition of terrorism. It says if it's an act done outside that would have done inside to be a crime is enough. Why are we allowing the support anywhere in the world of all these terroristic crimes unless the United States was a terrorist itself? Israel set to be investigated for war crimes in Palestinian territories, ICC announces. Why are we allowing this nonsense without outrage and without a better foundation than name-calling against the people that don't even exist? And yet we continue to be silent against it, and it keeps on going. And why, in this case, do you think, oh, Israel going to be investigated for war crimes? This was back in a report, in a complaint that was made back in 2014. Folks, why so long? Where is the world? Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Please, stop it. And all I hear between all the intelligent people I see around, they're just bickering amongst themselves to see how much better they can call someone else a name when there's actual criminal there that needs to be called out for the ability to get away and not be held accountable. And these people are not actually the state. And when I say that, I become a big violent criminal because I don't believe in the state of Israel is currently defined. Guess what? A state of Israel was created long before these people, and I've gone through that. But I'm talking about the man, and I'm talking about the authority that these people called Israelis claim, the Zionistas claim, to call themselves Semites, but deny it as well, but won't give the whole linguistic class the protection that they expect. The state of Israel was created when Israel, the man, was given favor and his sons and grandsons were given the land in Palestine. Guess what that does? That says there was a state of Israel. That then includes the 12 tribes and all those people that can claim the 12 tribes. That makes the Judeans, from which the Zionists try and claim authority, only 1/12. There's so many more people over there that deserve to not be beat down and to be recognized. That the world body is not doing that at all. No, the ICC, the International Crimes Court, it comes out, a criminal court, it doesn't even have jurisdiction necessarily over Israel because it's not a state either, and other things. But no, that comes out 5 years later, folks. Is that really justice? Is that goodwill on earth? Is that good peace among men? No, nothing. And that's the lie. And it's done by all this semantic abuse, is all I can come up with. No, I'm not an anti-Semite at all. In fact, I'm seeming it's impossible. I'm anti-Semitic, semantic, anti-semantic. I'm talking about the abuse. Legalisms do the same thing, or can do it. And so once you start seeing this, it's not, I don't have a guilt in me one little bit talking about how this is working, because I know that's the kind of addressing this abuse, this linguistic abuse, it's the key to to outing the criminal that I talk to you all the time about. I rarely talk about Israel and all this, but this has now come to a domestic place near you, if not to your home. And it's been done on an abuse of language. And until we step up and stop making excuses, oh, it's too much, oh, it's legalism, oh, it's this, oh, it's that, oh, look at the lunacy behind it. Yeah, until we stop that and set the foundation of this terminology and make it a definition, not a working bludgeon for everybody, from objective basis, not special interest, we're going to suffer serious, serious consequences. Part of me is just totally dismay of the utility of man with these concepts like religion, like the concepts of government and the concepting of politics. Just beyond me, folks. But I see there's harm being done by it, and then I find an objective basis that at least provides a solid foundation to start from. Now, people will get all over this state thing. Oh, state's no good. When you come together with a group of people and let's say you take an action, that's a state. It's a condition. So I don't get too wrapped up in all this stuff. Wrapping yourself around that terminological thing without a purpose is just an excuse. Like the word corporation, and the government's a corporation. If you say that, you'd have never done a study, and I know that immediately as soon as you don't put the restrictions on what that actually meant, I know you don't know the first thing about it. Oh, well, how do you know? Well, because I've read all the black and white, and I've got documents after documents to pull up against that to show that you're wrong. I also know you don't know how to read the language. That's why I say go read the executive order. You'll see very interesting savings provisions. You'll see within this, it's not really stopping free speech. It actually can't stop the free speech. But it will put upon you the obligation to defend your position, and that provides you the ability to turn around and attack the validity of it. And I'm hoping that some of the, for as much as I despise the university system for what it's become and what they have admitted that they do relative to the United States of America and the property and the laws and all this stuff and the bringing in foreign invasion through laws that are just treason against the laws of the United States. Notwithstanding that, the educators in this system have the right to attack this as a violation as itself, I have just laid out to you. When you vilify one group of Semites, actually linguistically recognized in the class for the preference of another, and move religion into race, and you haven't opened that up to everybody and everyone, you've violated the law right up front. I don't see how this is even a problem. I mean, in summary, I've talked a lot about this stuff because there's a big hooey going on, but when you look right at it, this is just you coming to the awareness how bad it all has ever been. It's right in your face, and we stand as crickets against it. It's just a fascination. It's a bit of a joke. Serious as a heart attack or worse, because it means worse than a heart attack. But here we are. Messing around and letting us be messed around. Letting someone who's now finally going to be looked at as a war criminal, going to be investigated 5 years after the fact. Like, big deal, and from an organization we know doesn't do a dang thing and may not have jurisdiction over. One interesting thing, I hope you read my links. If you read in what's going on, you see very interesting points, because they relate to you and the acceptance of things called jurisdiction and all that. The Palestinian complaint agreed to ICC jurisdiction over its territory. Now, if they go back to the things I'm telling you about the land, that territory extends to the entire land that's been the occupier is given, not just Gaza. Remember, the state of Israel was created back in the time of Israel, the man, and his and the 12 tribes. That's the original state of Israel. It encompasses lots of different people. Not just those in Judea. I've been through all this again. Again, and if you look very carefully, I found another map where it doesn't say that Jerusalem was in Judea, where we would typically call the Jews' origination, Judeans. Jerusalem wasn't even in that state, that little subpart. It was in Benjamin. And so, we have some things we can go, even if John Glad would say that it's not seriously regarded, the myth of the Shem and Israel. Even if you go his route, it doesn't work. But these people are asserting that as a right, so you can't disregard that either. Why I think John Glad may be in slight error, if not complete error, where he concedes this language differentiation. I'm not here to argue with John Glad. It's interesting what he's written. I wish he would have made and I maybe have missed it, a better proof for the fact that the word Semite can't even exist. Notwithstanding he concedes it's a linguistic class. The semantics, ability of which we can study semantically. The abuse of which brings us till today when we got a president who, for political reasons, you aren't going to vote for Pocahontas. You're going to vote for me, notwithstanding what I'm telling you, how bad you are, the killers that you are. Part of me is just stunned. I mean, there's a little guy in me still. Maybe that's a good thing. It just stands there, wide-eyed, mouth dropped, stunned, staring at this thing. But it tells you how unstable, how mentally gone this whole thing is, that I don't know why, if you're more sane than I've seen, we witness that we don't have a right ability to come back at it. No, what I see is we do really all the wrong things. I said that's why my broadcast keeps telling you, take your knowledge and apply it properly. Knowledge is not power. Proper application is. All your knowledge is irrelevant until you can apply it. And so I'm not, again, I look at things anymore I don't know about so unique, but just a little bit different as I approach what I see, as I look through what's important to get involved with. I'm finding out, like the Twitter feed, it's just overwhelming me. It's like looking at the news again, all the noise that comes in. I was happy and blessed we went to digital because I could just get rid of the TV once and for all. And now it's invaded the social sphere, which tells you something as well. Getting back to the point here. A group of people who profess to be another group of people who can be shown to either not be or not exist in terminological senses, is showing you that there's a deception. We're told in these times, and at all times, you will be deceived. I've told you there's deceivers coming that will give you alternatives to buy into, and you need to be vigilant against that buy-in, that deceptive buy-in. I've also said be careful of the actions you take aren't temporary. And then this becomes a vigilance over time, and that means I think it's forever, as long as we're here having to be vigilant, right? It was a republic, if we could keep it, is not being kept. And part of it's not being kept by semantic abuse. And so today I'm making a working definition for anti-Semitism. That's what I am. I'm not a hater of people. I'm not I guess I could hate. I'm just not. You got to give me a specific though. Because in general, no, I don't have that type of a vileness in me. But I do. Maybe I do hate is being duped, lied to, deceived. Not people not upholding their oaths or whatever, or their promises even, for as fragile as a pledge. And those that get away with, that can figure out ways to be not held accountable, and those that allow them to not be held accountable. If I'm going to hate, that's what I'm hating. And so, I'm more of an anti-Semanite, not an anti-Semite. And I think if you can start finding out terminology that better fits you, in your honest fulfillment of wanting to be peaceful in the world, we can start impressing the example of how we don't and get accountability for those that will, like we see here, commit war crimes with the support of the biggest bully in the world, the United States government. And for those of you that don't know it, that's the land I live in is supposed to be the home of the free, land of the brave. I hear crickets. I'm right there in that land. I hear people scurrying around doing all kinds of stuff or arguing amongst themselves. When we get to the point where we're arguing that someone gets insulted because I use the word Eskimo, because I've now stomped on somebody's pride, well, you've just violated me. And it's funny how that doesn't get any air, but the squeaky wheel, the vaporous wheel gets all the pressure to cause change in an improper way. We lose our principle there, folks, if you haven't figured that out. Israel, I told you, is a war criminal. I told you, on the simplest thing, folks, if we would just hold this stuff to even the simplest. Remember, I told you, this is on record. Jefferson Mining District, we made a comment to the DEQ, to the EPA, showing that the Israelis had stolen Palestinian gravel. Jefferson Mining District is a mining district. It knows about mining law. It knows about gravel. And when you steal the resources of a people, you commit a war crime. It's not even a question. We called that out. We used that as an example inside the country, United States of America, relative to the EPA, which is one of the pillars of the foreign imposition that you will hear as Agenda 21. They all agree with this violation to us all. And so I'm starting to feel irritated again. Go back to my anti-Semitism. That might be better. I hope you're understanding the subtlety here. Now, that's just one. I've got like 3 or 4 different ways to approach this. I'm an anti-Semantic, Semanite, because I don't like the abuse that the one who's coming against me will be using to try and cause me to be the problem. Now I get to go, now the burden flips and I get to keep on them for their fraud. If you get what I've been saying about flipping burdens here, if you're innocent, there's nothing you can't flip real quick. You may not understand that, you may not have enough knowledge about the violation coming against you, but that means you just have to get quicker on how you pull it together. At least now the ICC says they believe there's enough going on with the Israelis coming under the color of legitimate occupiers, which they're not, they're internationally. They are being considered for war crimes now, 5 years late. This should have been done decades ago. And yet, when you look close, this is a big global plan. I've seen, I don't want to go further. It just starts to get into argument, and I don't want to get into argument about the examples. This is straightforward today. The word Semite academically may not exist. It's conceded. It's a linguistic form. No different than the distinction in the Inuits versus the global peoples called Eskimo. And then they take an issue with that is a fraud against everybody. It's one thing to have your pride of people, of those that you might identify as similar to you. It's quite a different thing to impose that on people and impose an evil intent. Okay? So, we have the semantic. The abuse of that causes me to be an anti-Semit, be believing more in anti-Semitism. No, my dog's Rex. So you gotta listen very carefully. This is kind of like talking about easily, or easily. Am I talking about Vince? Or am I talking about the word that makes something more quick to be done? Listen very carefully. This is what I don't think understand. When I talk about subtlety, this is what I talk about all the time. That people don't understand how this thing is working. You sidle up to something real close and you make yourself look like something else, and you kind of use that as the stalking horse I've talked to you about decades ago. And you run with that. You run with someone else's rights that they don't even know you're abusing. And that's what this whole thing ends up running down. But Trump's words are, this is simply political. He's going to give saving favor, if you will, to attack the people who believe that the unlawful occupier in Palestine could not be spoken against. That's how that's going to come down. And so we have a potential, well, again, I guess you could say innocent until proven guilty. The problem is we have no entity that can be actually one way or the other. What we have is the acts of individual people causing murder, which I can see for myself. I think we're past the presumption of innocence. And then the admitted validity of what they've done by saying there's an excuse. But we have a reason. That's not that's admitting that you just done wrong and you're just hoping for favor. And at this point they get it. Because we're hiding underneath this fiction called a Semite that doesn't include all Semitic-speaking people. That's the fraud. And then it comes to a domestic law that says only one of the Semitic-speaking people get favor, which is a violation of the discrimination to the minorities. The very act they say that they're enforcing. And so this occupier, this deceiver in the world, is now in the world. I don't know why people in other countries don't denounce it until it gets its position clarified in law, and in law with the land there in Palestine. Israel plans to bypass the world's critical oil Chokepoint. They have a say, and other nations agree that they would have a plan to put forward, is another hidden problem. the nations should be denouncing any ability of this group of people to do anything in the world, especially to their advantage while they're abusing people. Now, maybe we get to see at least the allegation of war crime. I doubt that's going very far, and I doubt that anybody will agree there's jurisdiction. What was interesting is, I don't know if I finished the statement, the Palestinians gave that court, given that it's got any authority of establishment, gave that court jurisdiction over its lands. Its lands encompass that whole area. That part's very interesting to me. And so it's another test. We get to see how the international organs are going to work. But Israel puts a plan to bypass the world's most critical choke point to become the hub of commerce for the whole of the Middle East. And nations are actually going to agree to that. It is astonishing to me. I don't want to read the story. It's just really sickening what we have, peace on earth, goodwill toward men, and then we see this nonsense. It's a complete deception from one to the other, and people get into an argument over it. They accept the burden to take on an argument instead of flipping it on its head and say, you don't have standing to make a discussion of your place because it's not been determined. At best is what you have is hearsay trying to sway the jury before the case. If we would just put some basic foundation on what we do, I think we'd be a whole lot better. Anti-Semonite, not anti-Semite, folks. Anti-Semitic semantic conflation, by definition political, and means anti-Semitism is Zionism, is really what you got to start getting in your mind. By definition, this is political, this conflation of this term. It's a semantic conflation. I'm pausing because I'm stunned. In my mind, does anybody get this? And will any of you step forward to start looking at this a lot more foundational than allowing this thing to come through, where people are utilizing their political advantage to give other people advantage? And the legalism that gets protected underneath it until it gets challenged before the very same people that have been given the privilege within the justice system, so-called. It is just what we tolerate in this country anymore. I mean, I guess I start to understand what the founding fathers turning in their graves means, given they could do that. Well, I guess they do, don't they, Grimner? Oh, man, what we don't know, we don't know. What we know, we find is fascinating. All right, enough there. We have a very serious problem. It's semantic abuse. I would hope most people would be agreeable to anti-Semitism as a system of starting to square away the language we use, square away the linguistic classifications of people, and bring everybody in those linguistic classes to the benefit, if that's what we need to do. Otherwise, why give any one of those any benefit more than the rest of you all if you haven't figured that little trick as well? You're being... well, the way this will be working in practice is you will be diminished, those of you, mostly my listeners, that are just thinking that there's a patriotism out there in the nation and it's kind of gone off a little bit. No, this has gone off a lot. Literally, the insane are running the asylum. We're seeing up front that the caucustocracy just does what it wants. There's no limitation. And how'd they get that? They brought up what I told you they would. If they got to the finish line before us, they brought up a national imperative, national security, national whatever, national interest. They beat us to the punch. They beat the sovereign people to their own sovereignty. And yet it's apparently nobody can stop all this. And now war criminals are being supported to be war criminals. And only how many half a decade later do we have a question? This is really needs to be squared up. If we're running into a time of good peace on earth and goodwill toward men, we better start living up to that. And that's not going to happen on itself, because bad don't fix itself, folks. And here's evidence. It's shocking in one regard, completely what I've been telling you. Another secret MI5 policy allowing informants to commit crimes ruled lawful. The tribunal, which hears complaints about intelligence agencies, ruled that UK intelligence officers may grant their agents and informants the right to commit crimes if it serves the national interest. There, they admit it, folks. Now, where did the principal in the intelligence officer get agency enough to give an agent the right to commit crimes? And you now see, if it affects that serves the national interest, anybody can commit crime. Are the actions of the Israelis any question now? And do you think in the UK it stops there and doesn't extend everywhere around the globe, in the United States and every other so-called democracy under rule of law? This is a fascinating, stunning statement, stunning admission of what I've been telling you is what's going on. They can commit crime against people if they put it in the terms that we've heard before, in other terms, I feared for my life, and they get to murder you. If they put it in the proper term, though, just use this semantic abuse, they can extend an agency to an informant, no less, to commit crimes. Murder, sexual abuse, bludgeonings, torture. The UK has extended that right. It's exactly what I told you. When you live in a global military consequence, there is no constraint. The Libre Code says as long as we can keep the raps down to the public that we're affecting, then we can continue to do what we want because it's for our security. Is you're looking at the UK government now as a military force, as defined by the Libre Code. MI5 provides immunity for agents, criminal acts, tribunal told. Another story. You can read it. You need to read it, actually. It talks about the history of this. Came back from 2012. There's a third direction that they talk about. Committing serious crime for the national interest is okay. Now, that should not be okay with you. But that is what's going on. This was our 9/11. This is why they put that in there. This confirms what I've been telling you. And then they want to say, if you go read very carefully, go read between the lines, and you find a little statement that said that what we're looking at here as the court does not touch on human rights. And I read that, and I just said that. The court says this does not touch on violating human rights. I said, that's right. What would you have said? Did you say that's right and have the answer? Why is that right, that this issue does not touch human rights? I've told it to you before. Are you paying attention to this? Do you really understand? Did you have an answer there? Why wouldn't it touch on human rights? Because in the terms of the Declaration of Human Rights, your rights are subject to what? Things of the national interest. Your rights are conditioned by what the bureaucrat or the official declares they need for the national interest. That's why this does not affect human rights. And they can murder you and torture you and sexually assault you. And you better be thinking all these so-called war things that have been going on in Iraq and all the abuse we heard coming from the U.S. military. You see, nobody got prosecuted. Human rights is not implicated because human rights is subservient to a national interest. I hope, I don't know, folks, I'm thinking, do you really get this? Why does Title 50 say what it does? UK decision absolutely conforms to Title 50. Don't commit torture. Don't sexually abuse people. Don't commit murder unless you're the government. I've told you this years and years now. Did anybody go read it? I know a couple people have. I know a couple people who did, and one at least made videos of it. Do people look at that? I don't know, folks. We're in a situation that's very serious. To me, this defines how a war criminal in an occupied territory can continue, why there's no accountability. Again, this is if it's deemed to be the national interest, is just what Lincoln did. This is an extension. Why do you think I keep focusing on all this stuff? Round and around and around. It's the same actual answer. And they take different methodologies to do the same thing over and over. And the best we can do is rally up a bunch of people and go to a state house to say, you don't have a right to vote on that. And they say, okay, we're going to table that for now. Incrementalism is killing us. And part of that is because we think we can go to sleep. You don't realize that when you're required to go down to voice your opposition at the state house, something's broken at the most fundamental local level. And anyway, so I'll lose the point here. The point is that you live in a militarized world. The UK government has just given, I don't know where they get this principle and agency as well, but they didn't discuss it that way. They said relative to the human rights, it has no implication. Based in national interest, you can give an informant the right to kill somebody. Now, my mind conceivably can go to certain instances that I don't really know too much about, where someone needs, in self-defense, or I don't even know, there's these little scenarios that developed that I guess you would have to do that to protect yourself, and they wanted to give immunity to the people that had to do that within the realm of it. But when I looked at the bigger world, all this is self-inflicted wounds, it seems. We caused this problem. Again, the dereliction of the United States to protect you at 9/11 and then blame you for it is the definition. It's not a working definition. It's happened 20 years prior. And you all stayed crickets, is why I'm getting irritated again. Here we go. It's right here, folks. The hidden military use of 5G technology. Back to Title 50. Why do they get to do all this? Someone finally talks about the military use of 5G. That's all it's about, folks. 5G is a high-speed Internet of Things data acquisition for sensors in the future while they come down and control you. And it's okay to be a war criminal in the world and keep killing people. Shoot them in the kneecap. Take out their press. Destroy the press. An agent has the right to give an informant, no less, for some drug-addicted... Think about this in the drug war sense, folks, if this kind of goes on. Put this together for yourselves. Finally comes out the hidden military use of 5G. It's not hidden. It's only hidden because the guy doesn't listen behind the woodshed. How many years have I been talking about this? A London summit of 29 members of NATO agreed to guarantee the security of our communications, including 5G. All right, you think this is just about autonomous cars? No. This is what the Internet of Things is all about. And your crickets against it, your crickets against the administrative imposition I keep telling you, is something you can do to more permanence. And it's going to take a lot of you because of the way the encroachment worked. We're coming 20 years later and don't understand the dynamic. I'm here today to talk to you about anti-Semanites, not anti-Semites, because of the abuse of the semantic abuse of our language. And driven by a few people, a few groups of people, other races nonetheless, like the Bar Association. Remember, lawyer being the example underneath the word race. So for me, that kind of twists my mind a bit. Wait a minute, why are they talking now? My mind already went in to talk about other people being a race. So that they're not. They're all just people, aren't they? And so, you can do as you will with all this information. I hope you step up. I hope you don't get embroiled in all this nonsense, but I hope you start getting a foundation for your thoughts and stop walking into the same name-calling problem and the abuse of terminologies that we see in the world today. Thank you, Grim, for what you do at reallibertymedia.com. I appreciate all the things you do there. And everybody else that sends off a favorite, a thumbs up, thumbs down. I don't care. The clowns that go thumb down without a comment, that's fine. I laugh. The people who repost, I appreciate all that. And the move reposting through like Minds and BitChute and all that, and all the thumbs up at BitChute. Thank you for what you do there. Appreciate the feedback. It just kind of gives me something to test where we're going with this, and try to find information to send you that you might need better. I'll be with you next week, tech diffs or nature willing.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.